that torn backpack, and she thinks she can enter a military base. Does she think this is a charity camp? Laud erupted as Rachel Carter quietly stepped through the gate, her pace slow and her left hand trembling. A sergeant jerked at his chin. Open the backpack. Check for any suspicious items. They tore through everything until a heavy metal box popped open, revealing a black metal with no inscription, something never recorded in any official file. Everyone froze, and then a commander stammered. It can't be. That metal wasn't ever given to the sole survivor of Hollow Tide. Rachel stood there, her face still, her loose black hair catching the wind. The soldiers around her didn't know what to make of it. She didn't look like much faded t-shirt slacks with the frayed hem shoes, so weren't soles flapped a little when she walked. Her left hand, the one that's hook curled around the strap of her backpack like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. The base was a bustle of crisp uniforms, polish hots, and clipped voices. And here waced his woman looking like she'd wandered in from a thrift store. The sergeant, a woman with a sharp jaw and sharper eyes named Lara, stepped forward, her boots kicking up dust. Papers, she barked, not even looking at Rachel's face. Just ath backpack like it was an insult to the whole place. Rachel reached into her pocket, slow and deliberate, pulling out a single folded letter. It was creased, the edges soft from being handled too many times. She held it out, and Lara snatched it, unfolding it with a flick. Logistics Bureau Temporary Support. Lara's voice was loud, meant to carry. This is a joke. You look like you're here to clean theftlers, not work a military base. A couple of younger soldiers snickered, one nudging the other, pointing at Raquel's shoes. My mom's got a newer back than that one, said loud enough for everyone to hear. The laughter spread sharp and mean like a blade slicing through the morning air. A corporal nearby, his uniform starched to perfection, leaned against a jeep, smirking as he watched the scene unfold. He called out, "Hey lady, you get that outfit from a dumpster dive." The others roared their laughter, bouncing off the metal gates. Rachel's fingers tightened in the strap, her knuckles pale, but her face didn't change. She looked at the corporal, her eyes steady, almost curious like she was studying him. "I wear what works," she said, her voice low, cutting through the noise. The corporal's smirk faltered, but here covered, tossing his head back. "Works for what? Looking like you're lost." The crowd laughed again, but it was thinner now. They sensed something wasn't quite right. A gate technician wiping grease from his hands joined the jeering, his voice loud over the hum of a nearby generator. "Bet she's got nothing but socks in that bag," he said, tossing his rag onto a crate for emphasis. The soldiers chuckled, but Rachel's eyes flicked to him, her head tilting slightly like she was measuring the weight of his words. She shifted her backpack, the strap sliding against her shoulder, and said, "Socks keep you warm when the ground's frozen." The technician's grin faded, his hand spousing midwipe, as if her words had painted a picture he couldn't unsee. She turned away, her gaze settling on the horizon, where the mountains stood like silent witnesses. Lara tossed the letter to the ground, letting it flutter into the dirt. "I need a command order, not toilet paper," she said, crossing her arms. Rachel didn't bend to pick it up. She just stood there, her eyes steady, not on Lara, but on the letter, like it was a friend she didn't want to leave behind. "Open the backpack," Lara ordered, nodding to a private who steps forward, eager, his hands outreaching. Rachel's voice came soft, almost too quiet to hear. "I don't recommend searching my backpacker." The private froze his fingers an inch from the zipper. Lara laughed a short, harsh sound. "What you giving orders now? Who do you think you are?" Rachel exhaled, her shoulders dropping just a fraction. "I'm not giving orders," she said, her voice even like she was placlating something to a child. "I've just seen a lot of people regret opening wrong thing." The words hung there heavy like a warning nobody quite understood. The private glanced at Lara, waiting for a nod. Lara smirked. "Sounds like a movie line." "Open it." The private yanked the zipper, the sound sharp and quiet. Rachel didn't move, didn't flinch, just watched as they started peeling things out one by one like they were gutting a fish. They dumped her stuff on the ground, a faded nightgown, thin and gray, the kind you'd find in a hospital. A leather-bound notebook, its cover cracked, pages yellowed. A small orange bottle of pills, the label half scratched off. Antipsychotics, one soldier said, holding it up like atrophy. What? She's a battlefield poet or something. The others laughed louder. No. Passing the bottle around. Lara grabbed the notebook, flipping it open, her eyes scanning the pages. Poems, really? She said, tossing I Tinto the dirt next to the nightgown. A few photos spilled out. Old, faded one showing a younger Rachel in a uniform standing next to a man with a wide smile. Nobody noticed. They were too busy laughing. A maintenance worker leaning on a crate nearby joined in. His voice, rough from cigarettes. Hey, poet, you write about how to afford new shoes. He pointed at Rachel's torn heels, his grin wide, showing stained teeth. The soldiers around him chuckled, but Rachel's eyes flicked to him just for a moment, and he stopped, his cigarette dangling from his lips. She bent down, slow, picking up the photo that had fallen. Her fingers brushed the image, lingering on the man's smile, and for a second, her lips pressed tight like she was holding something back. She tucked the photo into her pocket, stood, and said nothing. The worker coughed, looking away suddenly, interested. In his crate, Lara kept digging her hands raw, pulling out a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it, read it aloud. H09.do not open in daylight. Her voice was mocking like she was reading a kid's treasure map. What is this? A game clue or the mantra of a lunatic? The soldier sergeant her roared, one slapping his knee. Rachel didn't answer. Her gaze was cold now, like she was looking through not at them. Her left hand twitched just once against the strap of her backpack. The private kept digging his hands, brushing something hard at the bottom. There's something else, Hazade, his voice quieter now, like he sensed something was off. A radio crackled nearby, and a voice cut through laughter. Gate team, report to logistics for reassignment. The soldiers paused, glancing at each other, but Lara ignored it, her focus on the backpack. She reached in, her fingers closing around something solid. What's this? More poetry? She sneered, pulling out a small worn journal, its pages stuffed with handwritten notes. She flipped it open, her eyes skimming, then stopped. Her face changed just for a second, like she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to. She slammed it shut, tossing it to the ground. Nothing but scribbles, she said, but her voice was too quick, too sharp. Rachel's eyes followed the journal, but she didn't move to pick it up. Lara pushed the private aside, her hands diving into the bag. She pulled out a black metal box, heavy, no bigger than a paperback book. It had no logo, no markings, just three small locks and a faint outline of a fingerprint sensor. The air changed like Simeon had turned off the sound. A security officer older with gray at his temples stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. That's not civilian tech, Hazade, his voice low. It's got a military code. Lara tried to pry it open, her nails scraping against the metal. It didn't budge. She looked at Rachel, her smirk gone. Open it, she said, shoving the box toward her. Rachel took it, her hands steady despite the tremble in her lift fingers. She tapped the sensorance, twice a soft click echoing in thessalence. The box opened, and inside was amate black metal. 3 interlocking rings, micro text etched into the surface. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The security officer leaned closer, his breath catching. Operation Hollow Tide, he whispered, reading the tiny letters. Code null. A younger lieutenant who had been hanging back stepped forward, his face pale. That metal, it doesn't exist. It was never issued. Another soldier, barely out of his 20s, muttered, I saw it once, in a redacted report. Humanitarian eraser mission. The gate was a graveyard. Now, the soldiers' boots scuffing the dirt, their eyes avoiding Rachel's. A young private, his face still boyish, picked up the journal. Lara had tossed his hand hesitant. He opened it just a crack and his eyes widened. Sir, he said, holding it out to the security officer, this has a coordinates and end date K21. The officer took it, his fingers careful like he was handling a bomb. He read silently, his jaw tightening, then handed it back to Rachel without a word. She took it, her fingers brushing his, and slipped it into her backpack, her movement slow, like she was carrying all weight nobody could see. Lara's face watered, her hands clenched. "Probably a gimmick," she said, but her voice shook. "You can order a box like that online." Uddy laughed. Nobody agreed. The young lieutenant stepped back, his eyes wide like he'd seen a ghost. Rachel slung her backpack over her shoulder, her movement slow, deliberate, like she was carrying something heavier than the bag itself. A jeep rolled by, its engine loud, and the driver, a grizzled sergeant with the scar across his cheek, slowed down. Staring at Rachel, he leaned out, his voice rough but quiet. "You're her, aren't you? The one they left?" Rachel didn't answer, just met his eyes, and he nodded like that was enough. A medic standing nearby with a first aid kit slung over her shoulder overheard the exchange and froze, her hands tightening on the strap. She stepped closer, her voice low, almost a whisper. "I read about Holotide in training. They said no one made it out alive." Her eyes searched Rachel's face like she was looking for a ghost. Rachel's left hand twitched, but she met medic's gaze, her voice steady. "They were wrong," she said, and turned away, leaving the medic standing there, her kit forgotten, her face pale as she watched Rachel walk toward the base. "Hey, before we go on, can you do me a quick favor? Grab your phone, hit that like button, drop a comment below. Maybe just say hi or where you're watching from, and subscribe to fictional. It means a lot, keeps us going, and honestly, it feels like you're right there with us sharing this story. Thanks for being here." Alright, let's keep going. The gate area was still now, the soldiers standing in a loose circle, their eyes darting between Rachel and the ground. Lara wasn't done, though. She stepped closer, her voice loud again, trying to take back control. "You brought a prohibited object onto a military base," she said, pointing at the backpack. "That's a breach of protocol. I don't care what's in that box." Rachel didn't look at her. She adjusted the strap on her shoulder, her left hand trembling a little more now. "I kept it," she said, her voice soft but clear, "to remind myself that not everyone who survives is still a person." A supply clerk hovering near the gate with the stack of forms piped up, his voice high and nervous. "She's probably just some drifter who found that box somewhere," he said, glancing around for approval. "I mean, look at her. No way. She's military." A few soldiers nodded, but their eyes were uniassy, like they weren't sure anymore. Rachel's hand paused on the strap, her fingers tightening, and she turned just out to face the clerk. "You ever been in a place where the air burns yourlings?" she asked, her voice so quiet it made the clerk lean in. He blinked, his mouth opening, then closing. She turned away, leaving him standing there, his forms forgotten. Inside the base, the air was different, sharper, cold, like Earth mountains were watching. Rachel moved through the main courtyard, past soldiers carrying crates, past officers shooting orders. A group of recruits, fresh-faced and loud, spotted her, one pointing at her backpack. "Yo, check out hobo gear," he called his buddies, laughing, their voices carrying across the open space. Rachel kept walking, but her steps slowed just for a moment as some recruit mimicked her limp, exaggerating it, his arms flailing. "What's in the bag, Grandma?" Hess shouted. Rachel stopped, turned, and looked at him, her eyes steady, unblinking. The recruit's laugh died, his arms dropping. "Keep walking," she said, her voice calm. And he did, his buddy trailing behind, suddenly quiet. A quartermaster, his apron stained with oil, stood near a supply truck, watching Rachel pass. He nudged a soldier next to him, his voice loud enough to carry. "Bet she's here to swipe some rations," he said, grinning like he had told a great joke. The soldier laughed, but it died fast when Rachel paused, her hand brushing the frayed strap of her backpack. She looked at the quartermaster, her eyes steady, and said, "I've eaten less than you'd throw away." The words were soft, but they hithered, and the quartermaster's grin vanished, his hands fumbling with a crate as he turned away, his ears reed. The logistics desk was a mess of paper, sand, ringing phones. The clerk behind it barely glancing up as Rachel approached. His glasses slid down his nose, his uniform wrinkled like he had slept in it. You the temp? He said, his tone bored, his eyes on her shoes. What's with bag? You look like you're hiking, not working. Rachel set her backpack on the counter, her hand steady now like Keith Tremble had gone somewhere deep inside. I'm here for logistic support, she said, her voice calm like she was ordering coffee. The clerk snorted, flipping through papers. Support? You look like you need support. Got any that's not expired? He laughed, expecting her to fumble. She slid a card across the counter. Plain. No photo. Just a name and a number. The clerk stopped laughing. He typed the number into his computer, his fingers slowing as the screen loaded. This can't be right, he muttered, his eyes flicking to her face, then back to the screen. A woman in a pressed uniform, her hair pulled tight, leaned over his shoulder, peering at the monitor. What's the holdup, Jenkins? She snapped, then froze, her eyes widening as she read the screen. She stepped back, her hand brushing a coffee mug, sending it crashing to the floor. Rachel didn't flinch, just watched the coffee spread across the tiles, her face unreadable. A shout cut through the noise. Lieutenant Colonel Fredericks was riding AC. Across the courtyard, his face tight like he had just heard bad news. The clerk stepped back, his clipboard forgotten. Fredericks stopped a few feet away, his eyes locked on Rachel's face, then dropping to the backpack. It's you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You can't be the one who survived. You were declared dead. Rachel didn't blink. She tilted her head just a fraction, her voice soft. If I died, why do I remember every second of battle 121? Frederick staggered like someone had punched him in the chest. He sank to his knees right there in the courtyard, his hands shaking. We left you behind, he said, his voice breaking. The soldiers nearby stopped moving, their eyes on him, on her. Rachel didn't kneel to help him, she didn't reach out. She just stood there, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her left hand trembling again. I made it out, she said, her voice as steady like she was stating a fact. No Teverion did. A young officer, his uniform still stiff with newness, pushed through the crowd, his face red with indignation. You held a forbidden metal, he said, his voice loud like he was trying to break the spell. That's grounds for detention. I don't care where you are. Rachel didn't look at him. She opened her backpack, pulled out the black box, and placed the medal inside. This box, she said, her voice quiet, is the only thing that remembers I ever existed. She closed at the click loud in silence and slipped it back into her bag. An older soldier, his face weathered, his eyes tired, steps forward, holding a crumpled photo he had picked up from the ground. It was Theon Rachel had tucked away earlier. Theon with the man smiling. This yours? He asked, his voice gentle like he was offering her something fragile. Rachel took it, her fingers brushing the edge, and for a moment, her eyes softened like she was seeing something far away. He didn't make it, she said, so quiet it was almost a whisper, then slipped the photo back into her pocket. The soldier nodded, stepping back his hand, touching his cap like a salute he didn't dare make official. A siren cut through the air, sharp and urgent. A base-wide alert, emergency code 9 night. All former Hollow Tide operatives report immediately. The soldiers froze, their eyes darting to Rachel. She didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there, her backpack hanging from one shoulder. Fredericks was still on his knees, his shins pressed against the ground. Aprivate ran up carrying a fax, the paper shaking in his hands. He handed it to Fredericks, who took it with trembling fingers. He read it aloud, his voice, Rachel Carter. Code HD09 granted full access to all military facilities. All personnel are ordered to maintain complete silence for 24 hours. A radio operator stationed near the command building overheard the fax and dropped his headset, the clatter loud and quiet. He stared at Rachel, his mouth open, and then scrambled to pick it up, his hands fumbling. She's the one, he whispered to the soldier next to him, who nodded, eyes wide. Rachel didn't, just adjusted her backpack, her fingers brushing the strap where it was fraying. She started walking, her steps low, deliberate, the flap of her shoe soles echoing in the courtyard. A young recruit watched her go, his hands clenched, and muttered, I laughed either. I shouldn't have. The courtyard seemed to hold its breath. A soldier, one who'd laughed at the gate, muttered under his breath, "She doesn't need clearance. She's the reason we're still standing." Rachel didn't acknowledge him. She adjusted her backpack, turned, and started walking toward the command building. Her steps were slow, deliberate, the flap of her shoes salsicoing in the quiet. Frederick stood his face, pale, and called after her lieutenant. "Your order." Rachel didn't turn back. "I don't need a medal," she said, her voice carrying over her shoulder. "I need an order." Inside the command building, the air was thick with tension. Officers stood in clusters, their voices low, their eyes flicking torrical as she walked past. A major her uniform adorned with medals stopped mid-sentence, her coffee cup trembling in her hand as Rachel passed. "Thatcher," she whispered to an aide who nodded as fixed on the floor. Rachel didn't look at them, didn't stop, just moved toward a small office at the end of the hall. The door was open, and inside Amon stood waiting. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform plain but immaculate. He didn't speak, didn't need to. When he stepped into the light, the room shifted. Officers straightened their hands, falling to their sides. Captain, his grin smug, froze his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. A woman who whispered about Rachel's clothes looked away, her face red. The man was Rachel Shun's band, though nobody said his name. They didn't need to. His presence was enough, quiet, steady like a storm held back. He walked to Rachel, his hand brushing her arm, possessive, just there. She didn't smile, didn't soften, but her left hand stopped trembling just for a moment. "You're late," she said, her voice soft, almost teasing. He knitted his eyes on hers. "Got held up," he said, his voice low, but they worried only two people in the room. A communications officer stationed at a desk near the office fumbled with his headset, his fingers shaking as Hever heard the exchange. He leaned toward a colleague, his voice a harsh whisper. "That's General Carter, her husband. Why didn't anyone tell us?" His colleague, a young woman with a clipboard, shook her head, her eyes fixed on Rachel. She clutched the clipboard tighter, her knuckles white, and whispered back, "They didn't tell us. Because we didn't deserve to know." Rachel's husband glanced at them, his eyes calm but piercing, and the officer dropped his headset again, the sound echoing in the quiet hall. The captain with the coffee cup set it down too hard, the liquid sloshing over the edge. A young aide standing near the door whispered Tonather, "That's General Carter, her husband." The room seemed to shrink, the air heavy with realization. Rachel's husband didn't look at them, just stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on her back. She leaned into it just a fraction, her shoulders relaxing for the first time that day. The major with the medal stepped forward, her voice hesitant. "Lieutenant Carter, I wouldn't know her." Rachel's eyes met hers, steady, unyielding. "You weren't supposed to," she said, and turned away, her husband at her side. The consequence came fast, like ripples in a pond. Lara, the sergeant who'd thrown Rachel's letter to the ground, waskled into a meeting that afternoon. By evening, her badge was gone, her name off the roster. The young soldier who had mocked the pills found his name trending online. A video of his lauder clipped and shared his sponsorship with a local brand. Canlid by morning, the lieutenant who'd called for detention was reassigned to a desk job, his file marked for review. The maintenance worker who jerried about her shoes was seen packing his locker, his face pale, his cigarette unlit. Nobody said Rachel's name, but everyone knew. The base was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like respect, or maybe fear. Rachel didn't stay long. She walked through the base one last time, her backpack slung over her shoulder, her steps steady despite the worn soles. A young private, the one who'd picked up her journal, stood at attention as she passed, his eyes wet. He didn't speak, just nodded his hand, brushing his chest like he wanted to salute, but couldn't. Rachel didn't stop, didn't acknowledge him. Both her fingers brushed the photo in her pocket, the one of the man who didn't make it. She kept walking, the mountains looming behind her, their shadows long and cold. As she passed the barracks, a group of soldiers unloading supplies stepped, their hands still on the crates. One, a woman with a braid, steps forward, her voice shaking. "Ma'am, I'm sorry for what they said at the gate." Rachel paused, her eyes meeting the woman's, and for a moment, the air washavy with something unspoken. She nodded just once and said, "You didn't say it." The woman's eyes filled and she stepped back, her hands trembling as she returned to her work. Rachel kept walking, her backpack swaying slightly, the mountains, watching in silence. Years ago, she'd stood on a battlefield, her uniform crisp, her voice sharp, giving orders that saved lives. Now, she carried that weight in a torn backpack, in a trembling hand, in a box nobody was meant to open. A soldier watched her go, his voice low, almost to himself. "She's not just a survivor, she's the one who carried us." Rachel didn't turn back. She didn't need their apologies, their medals, their whispers. She had her order, and that was enough. Sometimes, life strips you down. I see you standing in the dirt with your truth. Rachel Carter walked away, her head high, her steps slow. The base watched her go, and nobody said a word. They didn't need to. She'd already said it all. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow. Wire and Heart Stories to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.